Okay, we're going to get started. So welcome to today's webinar, Data for Digital Transformation, how to get it, how to use it. Over the next sort of 25 to 35 minutes, we're going to go through discussion about digital transformation and how data is kind of, and especially transaction data, is one of your key assets in making this transformation happen. A couple of housekeeping items as we get started. There is a chat and a Q&A session that you'll notice down on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. If you have any questions or any technical issues, please feel free to use that as we go along. For the most part, we'll queue up questions towards the end and go through them in bulk at the end of the session. So if you have questions as you're going through, feel free to submit them as we go along or to submit them at the end. And with that, let's get started. So who knows what this is? Well, we've already answered the question, so we'll talk a little bit about it. This is the London Blob. It weighs 143 tons. It's about 250 yards, meters long, depending on what part of the world and what measurement you want to use. And unfortunately, this is an accumulation of wet wipes, diapers, fat, cooking oil, and other unmentionables. And they found it in the London sewer. And it'll take 8 men about 3 weeks to blast it apart using high-pressure water hoses to try to get this clog flowing back down the sewer again. So why are we talking about the London Blob? Well, it's kind of an interesting analogy, I think, for what's happening in a lot of bank and payment processor environments right now, which is just like a sewer, enterprise networks, enterprise data systems can get clogged. We're putting way more stuff through the same channels that were perhaps designed for very different applications and different content. We're putting all this stuff down these channels just like Londoners are putting more and more unusual stuff down their sewer systems. And every individual customer transaction, and transaction in quotation marks here, everything that flows through those pipes, has the potential to impact your business both in positive and negative ways. And so the key is trying to find ways to avoid that buildup and keep things flowing, but also still understand what's happening and pay attention to the stuff that matters. So we're going to introduce the second monster today. I'd argue it's a little bit cuter than the London Blob, but we call it the transaction data fire hoser. And this is a real-life monster, and it's in most banks and most payment processors. Because every time a customer transacts, they feed this monster. You generate a record of data about what that customer has done. And in some cases, that data is ephemeral. You lose it immediately. And in some cases, it has ramifications throughout your data systems in your network, and little pieces of it end up everywhere. And if those little pieces aren't handled effectively, then they can build up just like the London Blob. So unless you keep that data flowing to where it needs to, it'll back up. It can paralyze your decision-making processes. It can paralyze your technical systems. And it can require a team of people to try to flush out the backup and get things back moving where they should. So today we're going to talk a lot about how we tame this transaction data fire hoser and what kind of technology and processes and tools we can bring to bear to really keep data flowing through our organizations to the places where it needs to get to. So the big part of this, and the reason that this monster is becoming more prevalent and larger and more important to deal with, is because we have a lot of new customer habits that are creating some new challenges for us. So today's customer, we call them the Uber-banked consumer, is using mobile, self-service, and alternative channels far more often. Even simple transactions, like the number of times people check their bank balance, has gone up dramatically over the course of a week, dramatically as we've made mobile access to that type of information more prevalent. And so we're generating a lot more transactions for kind of the same level of service and the same banking relationships and the same number of accounts in many cases. But today's consumers also have multiple deposit accounts, and those accounts are often spread across multiple institutions. And so their business is fragmented, and you're never quite sure what piece of it you're getting and what piece you could get, and understanding that is important. They tend to be tech-savvy and information-hungry. That's why we see demand for real-time access to information and to services and products, and they're shopping around, and they expect that kind of convenience and instant gratification. And so our consumer expectations have taken a major jump upwards, and this creates a lot of challenges for us as banks and payment processors trying to satisfy this consumer. You've got to deliver immediate response time to inquiries that perhaps you may have been content, and the consumer may have been content for those to take a few days in the past. We're dealing with a lot more data, higher volumes, higher velocity. I would argue the data depreciates over time. In other words, the value of a data point in the mobile channel declines very quickly, because if you can't act upon it within the time range the customer expects, perhaps a couple of seconds, couple of minutes, a couple of hours, then it really becomes irrelevant or useless, because they may just walk over somewhere else and find the product or service that they're looking for. Or they may pick up the phone and call into the call center when they don't get immediate reaction out of the mobile channel, and that drives up your cost to serve. So lots of challenges around this. Customer loyalty seems to be declining pretty steadily. We've got a lot of silent and costly defections where customers will all of a sudden move their business bit by bit, and you don't notice that churn until it's gone. And I think there's been a lot of consumer education about fraud, and so we're all far more conscious of unusual transactions and what's going on in our account as well. And certainly, this is no time for a delayed reaction if the information needs to be instantaneous. So we've got all these new customer habits, all these new challenges, and so it's kind of no surprise that customer satisfaction has become a top priority for banks. And I think what's interesting is that for the first time, customer satisfaction, things like Net Promoter Scores and client loyalty and these types of KPIs, have actually vaulted above sales results, operating cost reductions, regulatory compliance, and even fraud and risk management on the list of priorities for retail banks. So I think this is a telling number for a couple of reasons. I think it's telling because we're realizing that if we don't get these customer relationships cemented and maintained, and we don't take care of them, then our ability to cross-sell or upsell, or our ability to reduce cost to serve, those opportunities just don't exist because we're not actually keeping the customer and doing what we need to with the customer. So it's nice to see this flip, but it certainly means a change in the way that we look at the business. And so that's where we really come to, how do you measure what matters and measure this customer satisfaction picture? And this is where transaction data and that data fire hose we talked about earlier really comes into play, because transaction intelligence, the ability to understand consumer transactions, can really drive that digital relationship. Understanding what are customers experiencing across all channels, so being able to look at and measure Net Promoter Score, churn, and faults per 1,000 transactions, and things like that, and being able to do that across any and all channels in a consistent way becomes really, really important in maintaining that digital relationship. Also understanding the business value of a consumer interaction, the profitability, perhaps adoption of different card products, different other products and services, or even card usage. Those are all KPIs we can use to understand how we're evolving that digital customer relationship. And again, it boils down to transactions at the end of the day. We want to figure out how we can improve customer engagement across channels. So this comes to that core customer satisfaction measurement. It also comes to wallet share. It also comes to how many engaged customers do we have. A number of the banks we work with actually measure the number of products and services a customer consumes, and they score their engagement level with that customer as a result. And as we start to shift a little bit more into a technical lens, how are all of the parts of my delivery channel behaving? So there's a classic measure of availability, which is important, but also understanding transaction completion rates. How long does it take us to restore service when things do go wrong? How often are we meeting our SLAs internally and to our customers? And ultimately, what is our cost to serve in each of these channels? And is it increasing as we increase the complexity and the number of transaction types and options that we have in that channel, or are we able to hold it flat as we improve the service offering within a channel? All of those are parts of the puzzle as well. And finally, where is risk lurking in the system? Risk in terms of ATM cash outs or cash drains, which are obviously a common attack vector these days. Looking at flag transactions, looking at decline rates, looking at fraud loss. These are all key performance indicators that we can both measure by looking at transactions, but we can also move by understanding our transactions better. And so with this, actually, we'd like to show our first poll here, which is, which of the following topics are most important to you right now? Thinking back to that question list. Is it about understanding customer experience across channels? Is it about calculating the business value of each consumer interaction? Is it about improving engagement, delivery channel performance, or risk detection? And feel free to select more than one here if you'd like. Obviously, you don't have to choose just one priority. And I'll give that about a minute for everyone to find the voting controls. Okay, so far we're definitely seeing improving customer engagement and customer experience across channels at the top of the list. I'm going to wait for the voting to slow down just a little bit here. Okay, and I'm going to skip through the results now. So here's what we've seen. So almost 70% of you are focused on improving customer engagement, 60% looking at customer experience across channels, and then we see close third being the risk detection piece, and then we can see these changing a little bit in real time as well. So this is great. I mean, understanding customer experience across channels and improving customer engagement are obviously key priorities across the sector right now, and they're something that we'll spend a lot of time talking about today. And actually, this is a good segue to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is a three-step strategy to making sense of your transaction data and getting the right information to the right people. Because as you're shifting, if you look along the bottom axis there, as your digital banking transformation continues, our belief is that there's more data access. You're going to need more access to data, and there's going to be more use cases for it. And the basic really starts with priority one, making sure everything all works. So making sure all the parts of your delivery channel and your customer contact channel are behaving the way that they should, and being able to gather all that data, monitor and alert if you have operational issues. That's kind of table stakes at this point. And I know many of you have systems, various systems deployed across different digital channels. Often those systems don't span the channels. They can't monitor a transaction that is hopping between channels. And often you have great systems in one channel and not so good systems in another. So part of this is about getting yourself to a consistent level of monitoring and operational performance measurement across all your channels and being able to get that data out of all those channels. This is kind of the foundational priority, step one, if you will. Step two really comes down to understanding those customer behaviors. And this gets back to the chart we were looking at before around really understanding your engagement level and what's happening across channels. Being able to put that information in the hands of decision makers so that you understand consumer behavior and you can make decisions about how to help steer customers to different channels and what products and services to offer there. The third priority really becomes about now driving that transaction data into every business process. So not making it just part of the an analytical process you use to make decisions and understand behavior, but flowing it into fraud, compliance, other analytic systems, cash management, all the rest, and basically driving a much more automated approach to analytics, customer behavior measurement, and adjusting the underlying systems. So that's our three-step system here. One, make sure it all works. Two, understand the customer. And three, drive that data throughout all your systems so that you can actually be making automated decisions. Now, there's a variety of different ways to get started on this journey. So we've got our three steps there, but often you need to anchor this around a use case, around something that you want to improve. And so what I took a moment to do here is to write down the 5 main reasons banks and processors use the INETCO technology. And I'll walk through these briefly, but these are really kind of starting points. So if you're trying to get a project off the ground, these are areas where I'd encourage you to look for problems and to look for pain points and value propositions that we can help you out with. One is really this shift from reactive to proactive, spotting problems before they have a widespread impact. Second is improving your internal response times, being able to really quickly research transactions, respond to customer inquiries, respond to external inquiries, resolve disputes faster. This is a second area of primary use. Third really comes down to if you got your systems running the way that you want them to, then the next piece is how do you understand customer behavior within or across channels? Begin to really see how a customer uses ATM, how they use their cards, how they use the mobile channel, and what the interplay is between those, and which transactions they choose to do in which locations. And certainly as these channels converge more, where we're starting to bridge a mobile transaction into a cash transaction from an ATM, for instance, understanding that behavior and who may be candidates for that kind of service and where you need to offer it becomes pretty critical. Fourth main case is detecting unusual transaction patterns in real time, so supplementing your existing fraud and risk systems with some real-time analysis of your transactions as they go along. And the final case is looking for applications that rely on transaction data but perhaps don't have the data fast enough, don't have it complete enough, or are missing chunks of data in order to be able to really do the job that you hired that technology for. And we'll spend a fair bit of time talking about this particular use case through the rest of the webinar. So I've talked for a little while here. I'd like to put up another poll and get everyone to interact and talk about what are some of the core use cases that you think could have most value in your organization. So we'll leave this poll open for about a minute and let everyone vote here on which of these use cases is the highest priority. Spotting problems, researching transactions, understanding customer behavior, spotting those unusual transactions, or actually enriching other applications with transaction data. Excuse me. Okay, so it looks like vast majority wanting to understand customer behavior, followed by detecting unusual transactions, so getting at the fraud and the risk side. That makes sense. There's very strong value propositions to be built around each of these areas. And it looks like actually we're seeing a fairly good uptake on the notion of enriching other applications, which is good as well because you're in the right webinar. That's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so with this I'm going to talk a little bit about the INETCO solution and just give a bit of a backdrop. I know many of you in the webinar are probably familiar with INETCO's software, but I'll just do a quick recap for those who aren't. So our software is streaming analytics software that's specifically designed to analyze transactions. So we analyze transaction data in motion, and what I mean by this is as the transactions are happening, as your customers are transacting with you, and inquiring about products and services and checking their balances and getting cash out, we're actually analyzing those transactions as they're in motion. So we're not waiting for them to fall into a data warehouse and pick out the other side or fall into a system of record. We're actually doing real-time analysis on them. And so that allows you to spot events as they're emerging and highlight those immediately so you can see, is there some unusual usage? Is customer behavior changing significantly within a particular region? And you can begin to drive action out of that. If you're spotting that all of a sudden there's high cash demand at an ATM, you could change your cash delivery schedule because it could be there's a local event that's driving usage, and it could be a lot of foreign card usage, and there could be a great revenue opportunity for you there. But you have to be able to respond to that in real time. You can't wait until the end of the day and notice that the ATM ran out of cash. At that point, the opportunity's lost. You need to be able to act on it immediately. If you spot that all of a sudden there's a lot of magstripe fallback transactions at particular retail locations, you're going to want to act on that right away because that means that you're taking on risk in that card transaction and that the liability shift is going to your merchant customer, and chances are you may see a sudden jump in chargebacks or something like that that's going to really drive up your internal costs. So there are a lot of cases where it really makes sense to be able to highlight and understand a customer event immediately and to do that in real time. The INETCO platform can do this across many different kinds of transactions, mobile, online, point of sale, ATM, branch, you name it. And there's some pretty sophisticated technology underneath the hood to make this all happen. The advantages of using our software for this is, obviously we're doing this in real time, but we're also doing it in a very unique way where we're doing very lightweight, non-invasive capture of this data. So we're acquiring this data directly off your network. You're not having to change your applications. You're not having to distribute agents on all your ATMs. You're not having to poke code into your mobile applications to make all this work. You can simply capture the customer data as it's streaming across your network, and we'll make sense of it. Our decoding is very powerful here. So this is not just about spotting that customer A did a transaction. It's about understanding it in detail and seeing that complete transaction. Where did they transact? What was the dollar amount? What kind of card did they use? What were they trying to do? Did the transaction fail before it was successful? And also handling all the PCI and sensitive customer aspects of this as well, because what we want to do is be able to quickly put this data into the hands of anyone in the organization, but we want to do that without creating any PCI scope risk. And that's a problem that we've solved within the INETCO software, so that you can understand customer interactions in phenomenal detail without creating any kind of PCI exposure. And then finally, it's all well and good to be able to get at this data, but then being able to put it and get it into the systems where you need it is the final part of the challenge. So we have great systems for alerting and giving you dashboards and real-time visibility into this, but you can also bring the data into your own systems, and we'll talk a lot about that in a moment. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the INETCO data architecture and walk you through this. So we'll start on the left-hand side here. The transaction data is captured off the wire, off your network. It's decoded in real time. Then the transactions are correlated, they're sanitized, and they're enriched. And let me explain those three steps. So correlation means we can actually tie together a transaction from end to end. So for all of you who want to understand what does the end-to-end customer experience look like, this is your way to do it. We can see every step and every hop that a customer interaction takes across your environment. It's sanitized, which means we preserve the notion of a unique customer with a token, but we actually drop the PAN number and any other sensitive information and personal information that may be part of that transaction. So as the transaction passes on to other systems and other parts of your environment, you're not creating any risk here. And then third, we're enriching that transaction. So we may see a terminal ID if it's done at an ATM, but chances are you have a list of those terminal IDs and locations and model numbers and everything else. We can enrich that data so that when it comes time to analyze it at the other end, you're looking at physical ATM locations and model numbers, or you're looking at, you're understanding the retailer and maybe even which lane within the retailer the transaction is occurring at. Now, at this point is the first point where you can begin to get data out of the Insight system. It's been sanitized, it's enriched, it's got a lot of value. We can alert you of critical events. We can send you statistics on how many transactions each customer has executed, how many transactions have occurred at each device in your network, including if they haven't occurred. And those alerts can be sent into the application of your choice, and I'll get into much more detail about that in a moment. This is also your point where if you have applications where you want to get real-time transaction data streamed into those applications, you can pull it out of Insight right at this point as well. Now the data then, we use Apache Drill to move the data from our real-time store into a colder storage mechanism, which is a Hadoop cluster. And at this point, you can now keep the data for long periods of time. So you can gain historical access to it, and you can query the data out of here. We also provide dashboards and longer-term interfaces to this data as well. And then you can actually directly query this using SQL as well, and I'll get into all the details about how this works in a moment. So you can kind of think of three main ways to get the data. You can get real-time alerts and statistics. You can get real-time transactions streamed into the app of your choice, or you can gain full access to current and historical data using open data access. Here's a bit of a breakdown of some of these data access options and use cases. So the first piece is just looking at the data that's within the product, the transaction log files, the extended search capabilities we have. For those of you who are INETCO customers, there is a long-awaited enhancement in the product now where you can look at up to 90 days or even more of our detailed transaction history online. And this is a pretty straightforward upgrade to the product, and if you're interested in that, definitely let us know, and we can help figure out how to get you upgraded to that longer-term view of the data. But this is really about doing real-time monitoring, being able to troubleshoot, do forensic analysis of transactions. So there's a variety of fraud investigation cases here, consolidating all that transaction data into one place, and there's compliance scenarios around here as well. We also have a variety of custom API connections for firing alerts, event triggers, and statistics into third-party systems. So if you're running NCR AppTravision, Fiserv Device Manager, the Gasper ticketing system, HP OpenView, Tivoli, Splunk, we can send our data directly into those systems, and there are predefined connectors that ship with the Insight product for doing that. We also can send it out via syslog if there's other systems that you want to use here, and the ... is, it's fairly straightforward for us to create additional connectors through our professional services capability if there are other systems that you want to stream alerts, events, and statistics into. The third data access option is really around more bulk data delivery. So being able to deliver a batch of data in CSV format into a third-party system. So we have a number of customers who struggle to get accurate data into their cash management systems, into their fraud analysis systems, into their ticketing or reporting systems. And those systems really can't take a real-time data feed, but they can take a batch of data once a day or several times a day. And so we can deliver a batch of data into those systems. And there's a variety of mechanisms for doing that. If you truly want real-time transaction data streamed into your application, perhaps you have a time-sensitive application, we can send that in JSON format into those applications. It's a mechanism we use for our own analytics technology, but if there's a credit risk scoring app, an IT op performance tool, or a fraud management system that needs that data and wants it fired transaction by transaction, that's a scenario we can absolutely support, and we have customers doing that in the field today. And then finally, if you have longer range use cases and you really want to be able to get long range access to our data, we basically upload all the transaction data and messages into a Hadoop cluster every 24 hours. So essentially you can get access to the last day's data and keep that data for months, years, as long as you want. So this is more useful for customer analytics, for card analytics, for marketing and customer segmentation, and even potentially for building new applications that require that kind of access to longer range customer data. So 5 different options there. I'm curious as to which systems in your organization do you feel would benefit from richer transaction data access? Would you like to get transaction data into your ATM monitoring system? Would you like to get it into your IT event monitoring system, your Splunk, your OpenView, your Tivoli? Do you have a cash management system that could benefit from better data? You know, you've got a project there and you're getting some cash data into it, but you'd like to get more so your forecasts are better. Do you want to do more customer card analytics? Or do you have a fraud and risk management system that would benefit from richer transaction data? And just a reminder that you do need to click Submit after you make your selection here to make sure that your choice is registered. And that will also mean that you can actually see the results of the poll as well, so you get to see what everybody else voted. All right, so we'll just leave this open for about another 15 seconds, and then we'll have a look at the results. Okay. So what we can see here is that the 2 primary cases are customer and card analytics and fraud and risk management. These are the 2 systems that would benefit the most from transaction data. The number of you looking for it in cash management systems and ATM monitoring systems as well, and probably the lowest is the IT event monitoring side, which makes sense. So these are definitely all use cases we can support using INETCO, and we can get into a lot of detail about how we might do this. One of the things we didn't mention here is that obviously if you're running a point-of-sale environment, we can capture the data and bring that into there as well. Okay, so with that in mind, let's sort of move towards the end of the presentation and get into the Q&A. I've noticed a few questions coming in as we go along. So in summary, the value proposition here, regardless of which use case you choose to start with, is being able to get transaction data in a uniform way, collected off your network, in a single platform, and then delivered to anywhere you need in the organization. So there's a timeliness argument here where we're collecting all this data in real time, and we can provide it to you in real time. There's a versatility argument here, which is you can use the same technology, the same INETCO technology across channels, across applications. So whether it's point of sale, it's ATM, it's mobile, whether you're running it on legacy protocols, web protocols, you name it, you can use the same technology across these as opposed to having to set up siloed channel systems to collect this transaction data. And finally is the ease of data integration. I know a lot of application deployments in banks start with, okay, where are we going to get this transaction data from, and kicking off a custom project to pull the right kind of transaction data out of a core system or a host or out of a third party. We're giving you a uniform way to do this. So every project starts with connect to INETCO and get the transaction data that you need. So it can really speed up the delivery of a whole bunch of applications that are transaction dependent and projects that are transaction dependent within your organization. And with IT resources being as rare as they are, this can be a real boon. Okay, so with that, we'll switch over to questions. There's contact information on here as well, but let's have a look at some of the questions that have come in here. Okay, so with the popularity of SSL and TLS on all levels between devices, EFT networks, interfaces, and other systems, what is INETCO's plan to intercept raw network data that is encrypted? This is good. This is a good sign that you're paying attention to how we get at the data, so I'm glad to get this question. Yes, we are definitely seeing more encryption, end-to-end, point-to-point within these environments. There's a couple of different ways to handle that. One is we find a point in your architecture where the data does come into the clear, and we do our analysis there. If that's not feasible, in other words, you're using true end-to-end or device-to-host encryption, we can actually do decryption within our system. So if we're provided access to the same keys or the ability to call out to an HSM in your environment to do the decryption, we can provide that decryption as part of it. If that isn't feasible, then we go to our next approach, which is we can actually deploy our collector component in your application environment, either at the endpoint or on the application server, to collect the data in the clear. So there's lots of different ways to do it. Each has its benefits and its trade-offs, and as we get into more of a detailed deployment plan with you, we would be able to walk through all those different options and what makes the most sense. Okay, question about which of the INETCO applications will help with point-of-sale monitoring. We can help you with point-of-sale in a couple of different ways. Certainly, if you want to understand the technical performance of your point-of-sale system, we can help you monitor the operational performance of it. But we also have a full set of dashboards built up around helping you understand the point-of-sale business. So where your revenues are coming from, which devices are generating the most business for you, what kind of card traffic and merchants and categories you're seeing, et cetera. So we have both an operational performance and a business performance view of point-of-sale. We have strong capabilities in both of those areas. We can also stream that point-of-sale data if you choose into your own system. So if you want to build up a customer portal for your merchants or something, we can provide the data into that. We have a very complete offering in that area, and we'd definitely be keen to demonstrate that to you offline. Can we decline suspicious transactions in flight? Our system doesn't have the ability to control the authorization process. We are truly out of band, just observing the transactions as they go by. If you would like, we can certainly create events that would send into your fraud or your authorization system, and you could choose to decline a transaction based on those events. We are all real-time, so we could certainly be part of that transaction process. But our software doesn't have any ability to control the authorization process directly. And I think that's kind of a good thing. It means we're kind of observing and reporting. Certainly some of the things that we could be looking for are anything from mag stripe fallbacks to unusual transaction velocities by card type, by merchant type, by location, et cetera. So we could look at, for instance, a couple of scenarios on the merchant side that are interesting. One, if you're seeing a high number of reversals, that's always interesting. Two, if you're seeing transactions occurring at unusual points in the day, large dollar value transactions occurring very late at night or very early in the morning, or even occurring when you expect the merchant to be closed, we can alert on performance in unusual business hours. You may want to look for a large number of cards of the same type with the same bin being used at a merchant. All those types of patterns we can alert on in real time, and we can also provide you a historical view in terms of what the norms are there. Okay, and the question here, where do most people start with the system, and who are you seeing typically owns the data strategy? There's a variety of different starting points. I would say the two most common starting points are starting with us as an operational performance tool to monitor performance across channels and make sure that the delivery systems are behaving the way they should. The second point I would see as a common starting point is as a tool for a business analyst working within a particular channel. So for the ATM or the point-of-sale business analyst or the mobile analyst, being able to provide you a self-service analysis environment for really digging into customer behavior and understanding what's happening. Those would probably be the two most common starting points. The third one would be taking our data and integrating it into a system you've already got to make that system better. So if you've already got an ATM monitoring system, but you want to begin to understand the interplay of transactions and what's going on there, being able to forward that data from our system into your existing ATM monitoring. Okay, a couple more questions here. If we want to use something other than Hadoop, do we have options? Yes, absolutely. We've chosen Hadoop because it happens to be a nice, low-cost way to grow your data over time. You're not really paying licensing to do it, but if you have other big data technologies you're using, you can either stream our data in real time into them, or we can come up with a mechanism to basically batch load your big data environment as well. And that just comes down to a system architecture discussion. How is the data delivered to AfterVision? So we must have a couple of AfterVision customers out there. It's delivered through some proprietary interfaces and API connectors that we have built with NCR. So we can bring event data into the NCR system. We can also send statistics like how many transactions of different types have occurred at different terminals, and that can all be brought in there as well. Okay, and that looks like the end of the questions. So at this point, I think we'll wrap things up. If you have other questions you were too shy to ask online or that come to you after the fact, feel free to email me directly. Also, please do have a look at our blog and our LinkedIn profile, or feel free to follow us on Twitter as well to keep abreast of changes in the product and updates and news from the industry. That we keep a pretty close eye on what's going on in the banking and payments industry from a transaction standpoint, and you may find some interesting insights there as well. No pun intended. Thank you very much for your time today, and we look forward to speaking with any and all of you as you continue your journey and are looking for more access to transaction data. Thank you.